Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and to get to the bins that we're going to be checking in on today, we've got to come all the way over to the right here. Because they're my two newest bins. They're the ones that you see sitting up here on top of the frame set up for the Vermibag Mini, which I really got to get going one of these days. But these two new bins, in the case of the very newest bin, this is actually going to just be feeding number 2. There was only one other feeding given to this system so far, 11 days ago. And it was 11 days ago that we actually butted up these two newest of my bins. This bin's been around a little bit longer. This one's already been fed a few times, but for this one it's going to be just its second feeding. And last time it was the initial pairing up of these bins, which I do sometimes when I've got somewhat similar bins, but there is still kind of a fair discrepancy between the number of worms, where this system has somewhere between 16 and 1700 worms. And in here we've got, I think, somewhere around 700. I got some numbers written down on my little green board, so once we get over to the bench, I'll share some additional information about these with you. So let's get over to the bench and get to work. Yeah, it does look like I was in the ballpark with the estimates on the bins. So the older bin, the exact number, or well, the exact estimated number, based on, see a little here, I got a little number in parentheses. It was based on input from 7 viewers when we launched that bin, and we averaged everyone's guesstimates, and we came up with 1,676 worms living in that bin. And then in the younger bin that we're going to get to next, I've already got the older bin right here on the bench. The younger bin has already been populated on 2 occasions, hauling worms out of a cocoon nursery that I've got going on. And in this case, what you're going to see here is an estimated haul out number 1 of 339 worms. And that was an estimate with 19 different people kicking in their estimates. That includes me as well. And then the most recent estimate was just a week ago, 377 worms on that second haul out. That was 9 people kicking in their estimates on that one, bringing us to that 716 estimate. So let's get a glove on and get these little guys fed. So bin number 1 will be the older one. What I have for them is a pretty good assortment of different stuff in here. So you're going to see a bunch of not carrot, there's apple peel, and it's mostly apple peel, but you're also going to find some cucumber peel in here. You're going to also find little bits of strawberry here and there. And not only peels of cucumber, but the butt ends of some cucumber. I see we've also got a cherry tomato in here, maybe more than one of those too. It looks like even a little onion slipped into here, so it's kind of a mishmash of stuff. But I believe that this bag did start out as mainly apple peels, and then here and there I've just been adding other things to it over time. So besides coming in here for a feeding, another thing I'd like to try to do today is see what we could do about building out the environment for the worms. Because I've been wanting to run my systems a little bit more close to capacity. Instead of working my way up to that, I'd like to, give them a large environment to live in, and hopefully by doing so, possibly spurring on a little bit of mating within the population. So that last feeding they got cantaloupe, they got potato peels, and I think there was maybe one other third food item included. And it would have been placed right down the middle. However, we don't have any feeding zone indicators. But I've also got a couple old coffee filters on the ready here that we can use as feeding zone indicators. So even though we might not have them yet, or at least we don't have one here, we can add them. And there was other stuff lingering in here from previous feedings too. Some slower composting items, such as the seeds out of some mangoes. And I think another thing that they received today, the last time we fed them 11 days ago, was some other somewhat slow composting stuff, sort of like the seed of a mango, which is going to go very slow. They also got some avocado, so that included the pit in a couple occasions. I can't remember which got the pit, or maybe both got an avocado pit. And the shell of an avocado is going to go pretty slow. So we're already bumping into some of the cantaloupe melon rind, which also still seems to have some of the melon adhering to the rind, so they didn't really even go through all that quite yet. And since this is the system that's got the higher population in it, and they're still showing some signs of leftovers, chances are when we get to the less populated bin we might even see more leftovers, but that's okay. We're going to give them this feeding anyhow. So let's see, what else do we have here. This appears to me like a banana peel, but it's really heavily worked. You can already see a lot of the fibrous strands of the material that makes up the banana peel. It's really kind of falling apart. So they're working on that nicely too. There's a good bit of bedding in here too. You can see this system was made up of a lot of large chunk shredded paper that I just shredded by hand, I believe. It doesn't look like the type of paper that comes out of my shredder usually. Stuff that comes out of my shredder is much finer. It's what's made up here in my my prepared bedding that we're going to use some of. I also got a box of leaves from outside. So I really I stashed away a whole lot of autumn leaves this year. So I should really be using a lot of that in all my feedings. So I believe what we're already starting to bump into over here too is just a little bit of the avocado, chunks of the shell, some of the fruit or vegetable matter, whatever that is. I'm not even sure if it classifies as a fruit or vegetable, but there's clearly some leftovers of that lingering in here too. There would have been another piece of cantaloupe in here, placed in here last time. And this banana peel was even a leftover last time. That's more leftovers that we're bumping into here. There we go. Here's, oh wow, there's a lot of leftover on this piece, isn't there? Look at that. Kind of makes me question the the quantity of food that I bought down here for them, because it is quite a bit. And here's the pit from the avocado. But you know what? I'm not going to be bashful. I'm going to give it to them. I'm going to go for it. And even though it's apple, and apple in my history or in my experience has generally been a food that the worms sort of eat very slowly, I'm not even so sure if that's what we're going to want to expect here on this feeding. Because usually I think I'm getting it confused with when I put an entire apple in. It feels like the entire apple takes quite a long time to get broken down. And when it's, you know, just peels like that, I got a feeling it's going to go a little bit more quickly than if it was an entire apple. And this is the cork. This is just a cork that's been kind of going from system to system for quite a few years now. And it just is becoming quite interesting to see how heavily it seems to be getting worn now finally. Even though it seemed like it was almost impervious to any wear for the first couple years, it's now finally starting to appear as if it's really getting whittled down by the worms. So yeah, there's definitely leftovers of this and that in here. Even a lime. Half of a lime was placed in here for these little guys. And some people are going to tell you don't feed citrus to your worms, but you can see there's worms hanging out right there inside the lime, and they're not put off by it whatsoever. And it even gives the whole system this nice kind of citrusy scent. So you don't have to worry about lime. I'm not even sure why people considered it as a no-no type food. Probably because it's got, you know, citric acid. And who knows, maybe in the very beginning, maybe the worms can't really do much with it, but I think right there, that's proof positive that they're doing just fine with it. So here's even more. This is like almost like the half shell of avocado, and there's a lot of worms hanging out in it. And there again, I keep sort of finding leftovers. Keeps making me want to possibly back off on what I was planning to give them today. Here's another interesting little thing, a pumpkin stem that goes back quite a long way. This goes back not to this past Halloween, but I believe the Halloween prior. This was even something we looked at briefly during the last check-in. I think it was like the flower end of an onion or something. And something I talked about early on, which was a mango seed that had already been in here as leftovers when we checked in here last time. In fact, this system had 2 of these in there, and we pulled one of them out to give it to the other system so that we could be fair and that each system gets one. And I figured as soon as it starts to get soft enough where I can kind of crack it and open it up so that they get to the seed that's inside, then I would do so, but it still feels like it's holding up pretty good. So it's hard to say whether it's going to be me that ends up giving them access to the inside of it, or if they're going to be able to manage it themselves without my help. But I thought I'd just see if I can kind of crack open the shell and give them access to the inside if I could. And there's more leftovers, I tell you. Kind of really makes me question what we're going to find in the next system, where we've got somewhat fewer worms living in there to work on the material. But you know, let's press on. Let's not let ourselves waver. I think it is okay to put in some of these foods, which in large part are slow things. You know, this is just going to be getting worked on by the worms, but they're not going to be able to make a big meal out of it or satisfy the hunger of many, many worms with it. Even the citrus is probably just in the beginning stages of being broken down. The shells of the avocado, the outer rind of the cantaloupe, all stuff that they're going to, you know, gradually do away with, but some of it is slow going food. So they'll get to do some of that, and then they'll have a little mix of some of this other stuff that we're going to give them today. All that cucumber and strawberry tossed in there with what they're getting today, that's stuff that's going to go pretty quick. So they're going to have a nice little assortment of fast and slow foods to choose from. Let's go ahead and start by giving them a nice handful or two of bedding. I keep feeling like I'd really like to work on getting all my bins built up to be a lot more full, you know. When we started in here, it was like not even up to the halfway point in here. And usually I like to kind of restrain myself from getting too overzealous on putting too much stuff into a worm bin, because I do like to leave myself enough room to work and get stuff done in here. But I think we're safe from that angle. I think we're still okay in terms of having space in here, plenty of it to pile in good bits of bedding. And who knows, maybe the reason they're not really polishing off all this melon and stuff, all this avocado, maybe it's because they're just nibbling on all the bedding that they've been getting, because all that's food for them as well. So here we've got a lot of leftovers, a good variety of different types of leftovers, which I've placed in here as sort of the bottom first layer. And I've got a paper towel, which I thought we could use to sort of separate the old foods from the new foods. You know, just to possibly increase the interest in the paper towel, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of my worm chow right onto the paper, and then all that veggie matter and fruit matter, all this cucumber, all this apple, all this stuff as it thaws out, because it's all frozen right now. As it thaws, it'll probably start dripping fluids and juices down onto this piece of paper. I got a feeling this paper is just going to turn into worm food 1, 2, 3. It's not even going to really stick around as bedding for very long, if you ask me. And I really do wonder what we're going to see when we come back in here to check on these little guys with this apple. Apple, I'm always kind of superstitious about it just being a slower food, but when it's chopped up small like this, it seems like perhaps it's got a chance at getting eaten a little bit more rapidly. And you know, there was one other thing here that I haven't even mentioned yet, but I wanted to sort of get back into composting fabrics. So this is actually a piece of the towel that I had composted once upon a time when I last did fabrics. And I did not only a piece of this towel, but I also did a couple of my white tube socks. So I figured into here we would place a half of this piece of cotton towel, beach towel, terry cloth material, and include it as sort of part of their bedding and see what becomes of it. I think they're going to like that too. And there again, I'm also wondering if maybe throwing a little bit of worm chow on that might increase its appeal. But before we do that, before it becomes too late to do so, this other stuff that I'm sprinkling in right here is pulverized eggshell, which serves as grit in my worm bins. I know different people use different stuff. You could just use sand or rock dust or whatever. Pulverized crustacean shell, there's a whole variety of things you could use. The key on that is it's got to be small, tiny particle matter so that the worms could use it as their grit in their gizzards to digest the foods that they're eating. So yeah, I think this is a nice amount of bedding to build out this system with a little. We built it up quite nicely, and I want to do the same in the next bin too. And even though that bin has only got about 700 population, 1,000 estimated fewer worms living in it than this one, we're going to be adding to that one over time. So there's going to be other haul outs of the cocoon nursery that was the source for the worms that populated that system. And a lot of the worms that we placed into that system were even very small juvenile baby worms, which will grow in time. So while here in this system we're seeing a good number of worms, and a good number of them seem like they're nice, big, chubby, healthy, fat worms with big mouths and big appetites, don't underestimate baby worms. I mean, some people will even tell you that the baby worms are even more ravenous than the adult worms. So I'll be curious to see how the avocado and the melon and everything is doing in that other system, despite the smaller population and the population being smaller sized worms. We might be surprised. Alright, it does seem like we started encountering larger pockets of worms over down here on the bottom, down in the moist material, almost more so than we encountered in the feeding area. Sometimes it kind of just makes you wonder if the worms are just content to be over in the damp bedding and not even so interested in hanging out in the feeding area. Because here it does seem like we saw almost more worms down low in the bedding versus surrounding the foods. So that was kind of fun to poke around down there a little bit. Here's like the leftover of a banana stem. So I usually just want to sort of level things off a little bit before I cover stuff up. That's all I'm doing now, and then we're going to move on to feeding the younger of the two bins. That's pretty good there. Let's bring in one of these coffee filters, which is what I like to use as the feeding zone indicator. Should we ever decide to move the feeding zone from the traditional down the middle location where I usually feed, we can always use something like this to indicate where we last fed, so we know where to check when we come back the next time. And these top coverings seem like they're holding up pretty good. They're obviously showing signs of wear, but it does seem like we can just keep going with them. Oh, look at that. We did actually have a feeding zone indicator. It just stuck to the top covering paper. So traditionally I would just use that as just supplementary bedding down within the system, but now it's kind of just floating out here as possibly supplementary top covering. But it is pretty beaten up, so perhaps we won't even recognize it as a coffee filter next time we come in here. And perhaps next time we'll be more careful to see if we can track down the feeding zone indicator and reuse it if it's still holding up. Alright, fun bin, looking good. 1,767. Was that the amount? I think so. Or 1,676? 1,676. Just under 1,700 worms. And this is what I often worry about, is just stranding a poor little worm. I think he must have been on my glove or something, and he would have ended up out there on that dry plastic. Could have potentially not found his way back down into the nice moist bedding, so I try to be careful with worms that could have stuck to my glove. I don't want to cause harm to the little guys while I'm trying to feed them and tend to them. Okay, on to the younger of the two bins. Alright, here we go. And I've just sort of gotten into the habit of, I don't know, just sort of taking a little bit extra time with the first bin when I've got buddy bins like this, to see if I could use that first bin to sort of size up the situation of what's going on. And then I tend to pick up the pace a little bit when I get to the subsequent follow-up bins, bins that might be followed after the first one here too. I think we've got what remains of a feeding zone indicator, a coffee filter, which had stuck to the top covering newspaper, so much so that I couldn't even pull it off in one piece. So So I believe we're just going to salvage what remains of it as just bedding throughout the system in general, and they'll get a nice new one in its place. So I'd love to encounter a surprise in here. Wouldn't that be cool if we came in here and they had done a number on those food items they got last time? Granted, we did scale back, so we didn't give them 2 large chunks of cantaloupe like the other bin got. We gave them somewhat smaller bits. But I believe there would have also been an avocado with the pit. And you can see the worms are definitely taking a shine to it, and they're coming into it and working on it, without a doubt. So that's kind of cool, kind of what I was hoping to see in here. And I could tell right away, just from looking at the worms that I've encountered so far, that their size in general is much smaller than what we saw in the other bin. Because I think I mentioned earlier I was hauling worms out of cocoon nursery. Usually what that just means is that I'll separate the worms from the material that they're inhabiting, move them onto greener pastures, into a new environment. But a lot of times I'll see a lot of their cocoons in the finished castings material that they used to live in. And rather than just, utilizing that castings material as a soil amendment or, as a gardening substance, I'll hang on to this stuff, keep it around so that I can give whatever those cocoons need as far as time to hatch and let the little babies emerge, and then work on rounding them up before I treat that package of castings material as truly finished and worm-free. So look at that. They really did a number on that. That piece of cantaloupe rind has no melon on it whatsoever. It's really just cantaloupe rind. And there would have been 2 pieces placed into here, so we should probably bump into another one. Because the rind, that tougher part of the rind, the outer piece of it, they usually can't really do away with quite as quickly as the soft stuff that's attached to it. So I assumed we would bump into another chunk of cantaloupe rind down here someplace. And maybe we already did, and maybe I just sort of missed it. Maybe it was attached to something else. I don't see it, but it's got to be around here somewhere. Maybe we'll bump into it, but I don't want to go crazy looking for stuff. I really want to get a nice big pile of bedding in here to help build out the volume of this bin. Make it nice and big for the worms to have plenty of space to cruise around within. And I don't want to be bashful about that either. I want to give them a lot, sort of like we did in the other bin. A couple handfuls of shredded paper mix. Paper cardboard leaves are in that mix, that prepared bedding that I showed you in the plastic container. A couple handfuls of the dry leaves. I want to be really generous. And even the food, I think we're going to be just as generous on the food, although it does seem like we might have divvied out a little bit more of this than half to the first bin, knowing that we've got a greater population to feed over there. And this bin will get that piece of terry cloth too, that colorful piece of towel out on top. So let's get to work feeding. In comes, like we did earlier, a couple handfuls of this stuff. Nice little foundation to put some leaves on top of. And this stuff is put away damp. So I put it in the shredded paper cardboard, and then I mix it with little fragments, very small, tiny fragments of leaves. Nothing like what we're pulling out of this box here. That's all stuff that I've actually run through my filter. I got this sieve screen, and only the tiny particles of leaves that pass through that are what I keep separate to make my prepared bedding out of. And in can come the food. So, trying to remember, I like to try to remain in sync for the most part when I'm running buddy bins like this. And I'll do little deviations, such as scaling the size of the feeding to suit the needs of the population that I believe is in a particular container. But I also like to do what I can to sort of maintain consistency, so that at some point maybe I can even use what's happening in the 2 bins as a point of reference. So now one thing we already goofed on was putting the old stuff under the new stuff, separated by this piece of paper towel. But it's not that critical. What I do want to do though is I want to make sure I put this grit in here onto the freshly added foods. Those older food bits probably got applied back when they were put in fresh with grit already. So whether the old foods need much grit or not, I don't know. I suppose we could always sprinkle a little bit onto that as well. So cantaloupe rind coming along quite nicely. Half of an avocado also coming along quite nicely. The pit probably still too hard to be broken. We didn't try splitting this. Oh, this one's giving a little bit more easily than the other one wanted to. So it did actually feel like I was about to open up this mango seed, but I'm not going to spend a great deal of time with it. I've got a feeling by the next time we check in on these two systems, we'll be able to possibly open both of them. Very nice. So before we cover up, remember we wanted to put on that terry cloth as well, right? And we're going to see what we can do about increasing the appeal of that terry cloth by sprinkling some of my worm chow onto it. So I'm sure I've probably already deviated in a number of different ways. This is interesting. What happened here? Oh, that's got to be some of the some of the pancake mix that's part of my little concoction here. Considering I run it all through the blender, I'm surprised to find stuff in here sometimes like that. Even here, I put in some leaves. Something I added to this particular batch, which I usually or have never tried before. I've never tried adding leaves to my worm chow. That was a little piece of leaf stem. So I usually make my worm chow out of just whatever's around. I don't really have a set ingredient list. But leaves were a new addition this time. I had a whole bunch of pumpkin seeds that are piling up too that I've been collecting. So that was probably one of the main primary ingredients in this batch of worm chow that I've been feeding with over the past couple check-ins. And here too, I believe this system was also made with just a bunch of hand-torn bits of cardboard and paper, and that's the reason it's not really fine stuff we're seeing mixed in here. It's sort of similar to what we built the other system with, just large chunk paper and cardboard stuff that I used to make this out of. And that was just for the heck of it, for a little variety, since usually I just use my shredded stuff. Ever since I've had my shredder, it's just so easy to have a lot of that really finely shredded paper and cardboard concoction. But I had a bunch of leaf bag, which was used outside on the ground and was a little bit soiled, and I really didn't feel comfortable running that leaf bag through my shredder. So I figured I would just break it up into little bits by tearing it up into pieces by hand. And that's how I would utilize it as bedding in my worm bin build on that particular occasion. So things look pretty nice. Mostly small worms, you know. I mean, even though I'm treating this as worms that came out of a cocoon nursery, I also know that that cocoon nursery also has worms that were just sort of ones that I was unable to round up when I separated the castings from the worms. And those were just, worms that slid by, basically. So it's not only baby worms, there were also a good number of worms that were just not rounded up when I harvested a batch of castings in a completed bin, or a couple completed bins. Yeah, I think this system's going to come along quite nicely. There's going to be a couple more rollouts out of that cocoon nursery. There's going to be more worms added to this, so even though on this go around we're dealing with a little bit over a 700 estimated population, we're going to be increasing this population over time. So more to come on that in the near future. Yeah, this piece of top covering newspaper is holding up pretty good, even though the one in the other system might be due for replacement pretty soon. I think this one's going to hold up pretty good for a little while. Not only because it's newer, but also because we do have somewhat fewer worms to work on it in here. All right, fun stuff. Two nice bins. They're buddy bins that aren't really that identical to one another, but over time I think we'll be able to sync them up pretty nicely. And in time, I think they're going to be very similar to one another. All right, I got a few things I got to take care of putting away and cleaning up around here. I'm not going to waste your time with that. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to let me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.